Right. So good evening, everyone. And thanks to Nika Dubrovsky for this invitation, for making possible. Today we are having a meeting and a presentation by Viktor Misiano, who is a curator, art writer, and editor living between Moscow and Italy. For those of you who maybe are not familiar with Viktor, he has curated many exhibitions. Hello, Viktor. Good evening. Welcome.
Hi.
And very happy.
Andres. Hi.
You're here. I will allow myself to give a few words and to present you, and then give a floor to you, if you don't mind. Okay.
Okay,
so
go ahead.
Yes, so Viktor was a curator for a period of time between the 80s and 90s at the Pushkin National Museum of Fine Arts in Moscow. And he has also served as a Center for Contemporary Art director in the 90s, between 1992 and 97. Both of these jobs were in Moscow. And then he is also internationally known for having curated several Russia's participations in international art events such as Istanbul Biennale in 1992, in Venice in 1995 and 2003, in Valencia in 2001, and São Paulo in 2002 and 2004. Viktor also has curated or put together the first Central Asia Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2005. And then he has been involved with an international biennale, and he has been member of the curatorial team for Manifesta I in Rotterdam in 1996, which was very important at the time. And in 1993, he also became a founder of the Moscow Art magazine, which is one of the roles where since then he has been editor-in-chief. In 2003, he also co-founded Manifesta Journal, which was the journal of contemporary curatorship. And he's an editor there. He's been editor there till 2011. And between 2010 and 2014, he has also served as a chairman of the International Foundation Manifesta. And Viktor has been awarded the Igor Zabel Award for Culture and Theory in 2016. And just recently also a book has came out, edited by Silvia Franceschini, commissioned by Georg Scholammer, and The Transit, which is called A Curator Without a System, which I hope we will tackle and talk about today. And I'm very happy because I have actually in the past, I have been a student of Viktor, around, I think it was 2009 and 2011. So I've had the luck to hear several of the lectures by Viktor at the time, and to which were always very exciting and interesting about the art scene with which I was not so familiar with. And today we're going to hear a presentation by Viktor, and then we'll have a discussion which will involve me and Nika, and I think Nika, do I have to present you? I can do that as well, or everybody knows Nika. Well, Nika is also an artist, an author, and who's coming, who's been grown up or has been linked to Russian context, and now is living abroad and working internationally, and is dealing with the project Museum of Care, which is this very particular nomadic anti-institute where she hosts and runs and proposes different series such as Fight Club. There's a feminist discussion called the Yes Women Project. She's also a member of the curatorial team of several rooms within the Museum of Care, and running, for example, such rooms as decision-making documentary and taking care of visual assembly. And the Museum of Care is actually a resource that has been created after the passing of her ex-husband, David Graeber. And in 2022, Nika and friends also have launched the David Graeber Institute, which will focus on work with David's extensive archive and David's latest project on climate change. So I think this conversation will bring together certain very interesting points, because I think I'm almost certain that Viktor will bring up many interesting themes and subjects, and let's try to kind of contextualize them afterwards within the project and in respect to the Museum of Care. So I would at this moment pass the floor to Nika and Viktor. And Viktor, welcome. My involvement with Museum of Care I've been involved almost since the very beginning, and I'm very happy that now I'm the one who can host and mediate the event with you. So I would like to pass the floor to you, and then we'll have a discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, so it's my turn, yeah?
Yes.
Nika, are you going to say something, or?
No, I think, thank you, Andres. This was amazing. And I think now, Viktor, is your time.
Okay, Nika. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for inviting me. Thanks, Andres, for your words. I'm touched. It's true, we know each other for 1,000 years. And frankly, I just missed that you was my student. I perfectly remember you in Milano, in Naba, but it seemed me that you was in a different position. Anyway, you attended my lectures, and in this sense, yes, perhaps you're right. And I'm very proud to consider you my pupil. Well, I was invited in this program to talk about collective, common work. I wasn't surprised by this invitation because my practice, my curatorial practice, it's often related to work collectively, to create new models of curatorship which presume profound involvement of curator who usually is considered the author of the project in collaboration with the artist, in a practice in which curator is sharing his curatorial responsibility with others, first of all with artists whom he involved in his project. In fact, years ago, when I was giving a lecture in Yale University in the United States, my respectable colleague, Robert Storr, former chief curator of legendary MoMA, New York, in fact, presented me exactly in this way, that Viktor, it's a curator who defending collective curatorship. But I would say that this is not, if to be precise, it's not true. Most of my curatorial projects were realized individually, and not always my experience to work collectively with other curators were very successful, for me personally, because I'm still convinced that curatorship, it's based on individual responsibility. That still curator, as it was defended, that it was defended by Harald Zeman, by Seth Ziegelau, by Lucy Lippert, by German Ocelland, by those who really founded this professional practice, that curator is author of the project. He is entirely dependent on giving the first impulse to the becoming of the curatorial project, and he is entirely responsible for it till the very last moment. But still, I'm convinced that that it would be dogmatic to defend only one model of curatorship, that there are many models of curatorship, and one of the most substantial specificity of the curatorial practice, that this practice is very contextual, that it's very much depending on circumstances in which this project is rooted. First of all, in this case, in the demand of the time, in the circumstances which are giving life to this project. Well, today I'm going to talk about only one project of mine. The project you see on the screen, in fact, it's Hamburg project. It was, at the very end, it was titled Hamburg Project. Strange, enigmatic, unclear title, but I'm going to explain you this project in the course of my laconic presentation. And exactly this, in fact, it's one of the most, I would say, canonic example in my modest curatorial activity of a curatorial project in which presumed collective responsibility of its becoming, of its final result. It's happened, as you see the date, it's happened in the 90s. It's happened in Moscow, in this small institution, which in fact was mentioned by Andres today, Contemporary Art Center Moscow. Well, you imagine the grandeur of Moscow. Contemporary Art Center Moscow sounds very serious, very solid. But in reality, in this extremely complicated transitional time, Contemporary Art Center Moscow, in this precise time, it was the very first non-commercial public institution created in post-communist time in Russia. But it was extremely fragile, extremely small institution based on practically inexistent budget, with small donations, with small supports of a very few sponsors. And reality which surrounded us in that precise time was really very, very, very complicated. It was a moment of absolutely crazy neoliberal reforms, which brought the country to economical catastrophe. It was a situation of general poverty. It was a situation, in fact, my salary in Contemporary Art Center at that time was an equivalent of $4. And in fact, being its rubles equivalent allowed me, well, not to live, but to survive. And to leave thanks for other economical incomes which I succeeded to get in this period of time. So it was, what influenced, what determined the project as it was structured, as it's happened. It's an infrastructural catastrophe. Practically the whole very generous, very powerful and solid system of art, I mean institutional infrastructure, which we inherited from the Soviet time in the capital of enormous country, I mean in this time Soviet Union, which collapsed a few months before we started to work on the Hamburg project. This incredible infrastructure, museums, public galleries, cultural centers were practically paralyzed. Many artists left the country. Some of the artists left art scene because a market which was launched in that time, art market, which was launched to substitute state protectionism of cultural production, was at the very, very beginning. So for that reason, many artists were obliged or to leave the country, and in fact, the major artists left the country. But other artists of my generation, young artists of that time, decided to move in other fields, design, advertisement, or business. Many went into the business. So in reality, fidel to contemporary, to the idea of art, or art practice, remain a very few people, very short community, which in reality circulated around 2-3 independent gallery spaces. And the Contemporary Art Center, which I was directing at the time, in fact, was one of these very few small, fragile institutions, which in reality we could not even name institution because it sounds too serious. In that precise moment, in fact, 1993, I received an invitation from Hamburg, from Germany, from Hamburg Kunstmesse, from the Hamburg Art Fair, to participate with non-commercial presentation of my institution, of Contemporary Art Center Moscow. That year, Hamburg Messe decided to do a special edition of Art Fair and dedicated to Eastern European new galleries. And in a non-commercial project, they intended to present also my Contemporary Art Center. Getting this invitation, well, I asked myself, but what could I do in Hamburg? How could I present this very specific, very strange, very undetermined, unstructured, very fluxy situation in which contemporary art in Russia at that time, and by the way, not only contemporary, but entire reality, social and political reality around him happened to be. And I realized in that moment that to do just a conventional exhibition presentation, just to choose a group of artists, to choose some works, to bring it to Hamburg, to hang it on the walls and to say, this is Russian art, this is the reality of Russian cultural activity nowadays. It would be false. It would be absolutely not adequate to the situation. And I thought, reflecting, in fact, how to react on Hamburg Messe invitation, I come to conclusion that the most interesting, the most fascinating with the experience which we are living in this extremely complicated and even dramatical time, it's its potentiality. That we are on the zero level from which could happen, we don't know what, but many things. And this potentiality of the becoming were giving us enormous energy, inflamed our ambitions. And I decided to solve the problem in this way. I've chosen a group of artists. I've chosen them not according to my personal sympathy or my personal preferences, but I decided to be as good as I can, to be objective, to represent different artists which represent different tendencies, different trends in art scene in that moment. I invited these artists in my small office to sit around this table. In fact, you see it on the screen, which in fact it was a wooden cube painted black and a piece of glass on it. So it was very, very, very simple. and to discuss the situation, to discuss the invitation, to discuss all my doubts. How can we represent? Could we represent? What does it mean, representation? What does it mean, authentic representation of something? Yeah, of reality, of artistic reality, of social reality. Could we exhaust it, or could we present it in an adequate way with a project? What does it mean, project? Could project be realized nowadays in the time of deconstruction, in the time when projectuality was put under the question, when the grand narratives, if to use Lyotard terms, collapsed? Could a project exist in the time of small narratives? And finally, could we do it together? Or with the collapse of Soviet socialist system, and with a new political reality which was emphasizing individuality, individualism, perhaps in these new circumstances, collaboration, the same idea to do something collectively, together, to take a responsibility on a project together. Perhaps it's impossible. Perhaps it's something what is gone with our communist past. So it was that were the question which I put in front of the artist. And I put also type recorder on this table, and we started to discuss. This discussion started in May. No, just a second. No, in April. It started still in winter time. And we spent in discussion something around 4 months, meeting twice or 3 times per week. We were meeting around 7 o'clock. In fact, it was the time when Contemporary Art Center was closing for the public. And we spent in discussion till the last train of Moscow Underground. These discussions were extremely, extremely passionate. And this discussion, in the same time, were so passionate also because artists were absolutely unable to come to the common conclusion. All the individual positions which were presented individually by artists were total opposite extreme to the opinions of others. And this is totally adequate to the situation of in fact, it was reflecting situation of collapse of the system, collapse of the institutional and infrastructural connections. Everybody remained with himself. And as I invited very powerful and strong individuals, they succeeded to build a very solid individual position, which were absolutely ideological, which were absolutely unable to accept other. But in the same time, in the situation of the infrastructural collapse, the only one legitimation of the art scene, of the existence of art scene, were face-to-face, if to use Erwin Hoffman, American sociologist term, face-to-face relations. I'm an artist, not because I'm recognized by professional community, not because I'm exhibited in important galleries and museums, I participated in biennials. No, all that is gone. I am an artist because this guy is recognizing me as an artist. And in response, I'm recognizing him to be an artist. So only in some way, this long discussions were the only one possible way to legitimize contemporary art scene in this precise moment. And as these discussions were very conflictual and at the same time very passionate, at a certain moment, one of the artists said, listen, Viktor, you're only one here who is not an artist. Please moderate us. And in fact, that sentence suggested me a term which after that I defended in a series of texts. I mean, I defined myself curator moderator. Curator who is moderating face-to-face relations, and this is my mission. So I'm one who is initiating discussions, and I'm moderating it, but I'm not responsible. I'm not entirely responsible for the becoming of the discussion. Finally, at a certain moment, we an idea how to represent in an exhibition space this project. The idea was suggested by one of the participants of the project, very young at that time, very young artist. His name is Anatoly Osmolovsky, and he is definitely one of the most important artists living nowadays in Russia. He participated in Venice Biennale a few times. He participated in Documenta. But at that time he was very young, radical artist, and he proposed to continue a discussion, but not in a verbal way, not in a verbal exchange of remarks, but with objects. And he mentioned that an experience of French Dadaists who were playing with, I don't know, because they were, he meant poets. They were writing poetry in the way that one was writing one sentence, the first sentence, and he was turning the page, and other poet was writing the next sentence, but without being absolutely unaware what was the first sentence. Then it was turned again, and in this way was the poetry was produced. Basing on his suggestions, we really went to work in this way, but not with words, but with objects. And in fact, I took the table around which we spent few months in passionate discussions, and I put it in the center of empty exhibition space. And the night before the opening, each artist brought an object, which in some way was, as we defined it, an object that was an essential object for each of the participants. But in fact, Anatoly Osmolovsky, he came with a clamp, and he put it on the table. You see it in the left up corner, because he was defining himself as an extra object. He was very radical, neo-Dadaist, neo-surrealist, neo-situationist. He was positioning himself on the art scene as someone who is always extra. In all situations, he was extra. And in fact, clamp, it's an object which you are fixing on any other objects. Well, ventilator was early 60s. Antique ventilator, that was a contribution of Dmitry Gutov, hammer and nails of Vladimir Kuprianov, this small globe of Vadim Fishkin, this piece of cardboard with a photo from the sport newspaper of Yuri Leiderman, and this piece of ceramic. That was a contribution of Giyar, extremely important artist in this in the Russian 90s. Alexei Shulgin, an artist who was very active participant of Hamburg project discussions, he came and he sat on the table 1 hour in front of the table, and then he left, because his contribution was practically an empty gesture. He put nothing on the table, but he marked his contribution with his physical presence in front of the table. And in fact, as I suppose you realized, when we were reflecting, we were discussing how to name this project, we decided to give a title which was our working title, Hamburg Project. And in fact, Moscow community received this fax in 93. It's still fax time, and not yet email time, and not yet Facebook time, of course. So by fax, we announced the exhibition phase, representative phase of Hamburg Project. So one of these press releases, one of these papers, it's in fact announcing that we are starting, and the audience came while the second paper, it's when we announced that we are decided to close the project. Well, so the Moscow community came to Contemporary Center, and they saw this table, empty space, this table with this enigmatic, strange objects on it. After that, I gave to each of the participants, I gave a key, and I allowed them to come anytime they want, night and day, to open the gallery if it is closed at time, and to add another project, or to do some intervention, or to do whatever they want in relation to the objects of other artists, or in relation to the gestures, objects of other artists which appeared in the gallery in relation to the projects and gestures of other artists. So let me show you some images, so you could to illustrate you how the whole project developed. So step by step, new interventions were appearing in the space, were appearing in different rooms, and in the form of a chain of intersubjective reactions were occupying the space.
Yes, Viktor, maybe we can also then in some 5 minutes get to the discussion phase, and then if it's possible.
Sure, I see. I still have 2 minutes. Well, here just my last practical concrete remark. Here you see different papers fixed on the wall. In reality, here there was a drawing of Anatolia Smolovsky, which was created in relation to Dmitry Gutov, Dmitry Gutov book of Russian philosopher Mikhail Lifshitz, which Gutov put on the empty space left by artist Alexei Shulgin. But here, but one day I came in the gallery space, and I realized that the drawing was substituted with 50 copies of the graphic work. One of the artists who was not part of the project, he came, he took his drawing, and he came back with 50 copies of graphic copies of the original drawing, in the way that everybody could take it away. And and this is how I realized that as everything was, as we did not practice captions, as nobody knew to whom which object belongs, I did not realize that in reality, in this collective game, participated few artists which were not officially part of the project, that in reality this became a toy of the whole community. Finally, so we started 21st January 94, and we closed the project 21st April the same 90. I mean, the project in exhibition space. So few months we were passionately working in the space in this objectual dialogue between each other. And final remark, obviously, this was we spent practically a year in developing this project, and obviously we did not came to Hamburg Messe with representation of Contemporary Art Center. So now I'm at your disposal. If you have some questions, remarks.
Thank you, Viktor. I think this is very, very brilliant example also of your early projects and of your curatorial approach especially in the beginning in the 90s. And I must say, it's a pity we have just an hour, because I know you're full of different stories, and there were many other projects. For example, I think the Stockholm project was another, this was called Interpol exhibition. That was another very interesting failure, if you want, of this collaboration that was set up in an exhibition space. And I think you would have many, many other examples. What I want to maybe I will try to kind of guide the whole conversation, starting from this example that you gave us. First of all, by sort of kind of making a reality check, and it's very interesting in what kind of context of we're talking about this today. And of course, we know about the complex situation and the war in Ukraine, and it seems that this has brought us somehow almost back to the period of Cold War somehow, you know, that we have skipped like all this period that your book speaks about. It seems we have sort of went back to some kind of worst nightmares that everyone thought, or at least believed, would never repeat themselves. So in this very moment, I was today listening also to some conferences, and I was rereading also the titles of your book. It has been a very interesting and particular and prolific period you were talking about, where there was no infrastructure, where you as an individual were actually taking care and maintaining the whole system and trying to kind of very passionately work together with artists. There was a time where you could experiment, and I was wondering how could we relate to that today? And you also had an experience, or let's say you were part and experienced some of the late Soviet kind of era avant-garde tendencies and artists and their strategies, the apartment arts and all these kind of informal communities that were created. And afterwards, in the moment of total collapse, how this all sort of developed in a very interesting way. So I was wondering, what can we learn today, perhaps, from all that experience? And why I'm asking you that is also because the Museum of Care is a container that emerged also in a kind of a crisis situation. It coincided with the whole COVID situation, to which none of us were really ready. So it was also like a continuous ongoing reflection on what can you do in that type of situation, and what is a museum, like what care means, and then how you can put those two together, and what can you do actually in this virtual space. And before I finish my comment is, I think you and Boris Groys were actually two of kind of champions of coining different concepts and different interesting titles. And maybe we can make use of some of that arsenal that you created. And some of them can be found in your book. There are some very, very interesting titles, which I can quote a bit afterwards. How can we use this legacy, what you just talked about? This was just one experience, but you've gone through many of such experiences, and how you would contextualize what can a curator and artist do in this kind of public context of today. So maybe, yeah, creating context in which we can create kind of collective situations, dialogues, sometimes confrontational projects. And how can we turn this past into and bring out the potentialities of it, which are still kind of maybe interesting or latent?
Andres, but this is not one question. These are 1,000 questions, and each of these questions, it's $1,000 questions. Well, there are many answers, because in reality, it's again, you're absolutely right. It's again for me, who is even if I'm not entirely based in Moscow now, but definitely I still feel myself related to that reality. I practically dedicated my life to that reality, and of course, again, we are in an extremely complicated and dramatical situation. But in some way, we can say that all that expectations, dreams, which we lived in that exactly in the time of Hamburg project, yeah, I mean, turned into nightmare. It seemed that the whole project of contemporary art in post-communist Russia, which should be in some way a cultural practice, intellectual practice, which will lead country into the best future, of course, nowadays seems to be totally collapsed. But in the same time, paradoxically, again, now I feel myself in the same time in two situations. First of all, my behavior, situations, the series of choices and tactics I have to choose nowadays remind me a lot my beloved Soviet time. Because obviously there is a censorship. Obviously there are the topics you can't touch. Obviously there are things you can't mention publicly. in the Soviet reality. But still a lot of people are there. Still a lot of intellectuals, a lot of wonderful artists are there, and they want to go ahead despite the circumstances. And in fact, to go ahead, to survive despite the circumstances, it's also a form of resistance. So again, the main question is how to survive, how to defend yourself, how to present your position, how to avoid censorship, how to say whatever you want without practicing direct speech. Yeah. So this is something that really reminds me a lot of my Soviet past. And from this point of view, I'm optimist because I grew up. My formation, in fact, happened in the 80s, and I have to say that it was a time of very, very interesting discussions. It was a time of when intellectual life was extremely, extremely tense. But from the other side, again, I think, as in the early 90s, the key problem is community. Because in reality, community, it's collapsed too nowadays. Again, yeah, many artists, again, I brought. Many people went in doubt. Should they practice intellectual activity? Should they practice artistic activity or not? Or in these circumstances, they have to abandon it. Many people are in a profound depression. So again, I think my duty as a curator, my duty as an editor of the magazine, it's to reconnect the people, to recreate community, to repropose collective work, collaboration, dialogue. So from this point, I think it's not by chance that the final result, I decided to talk about Hamburg project, because in fact this experience it's all the time in my mind.
Yes, Nika, do you want to join the conversation or so?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Viktor. That's amazing. Really wanted you to become part of the community, and hope you will come again and we develop more.
But you are in the community. You are writing for the magazine.
Yeah, no, but
wonderful.
I think we also want to exchange between Художественный журнал and Museum of Care.
Sure,
yeah.
Of course.
So my question would be about also two questions. I'm very greedy, same as Andres was. And I know that Zina also wants to join, but me first. So what I want to ask is, okay, you already said that the contribution of newly born contemporary art, post-perestroika contemporary art, to the overall architecture of the post-Soviet Russia was a disaster and basically was a failure. But then my question is, how do you think they related the habitus of the post-Soviet art community and collectivity, one that you describe in your Hamburg project, and the underground Soviet art communities that you also very well know, with Kabakov that you're writing now in your new issue of Художественный журнал and so on? Because my feeling is that this is the answer on the question why, why the post-Soviet art world wasn't successful in influencing the architecture of newly born, newly born Russia.
Yeah, you're absolutely well. It's a very rightful question, absolutely rightful question, because and practically in some way, in fact, it was just present in my answer to Andres questions. In fact, nowadays for me it's extremely important. Experience of the Soviet time is also experience of the 90s, and you're absolutely right. This appeal to collaboration, to common work, to work together on collectively on the realization of the project, it's reflect a lot experience of Soviet unofficial art, of Soviet underground. In reality, in the 90s, this idea did not came into my mind, because most of the key figure of unofficial community of the Soviet time left the country. So in reality, I was building, realizing Hamburg project with absolutely different people, with all of them were absolutely new, and only me, I was only one who partly who was in some way involved in the Soviet underground. But Soviet age, or Soviet system, in that moment we were how to say, first, it was completely obvious that it's gone, it's finished. It's we could anymore appeal to it because it's disappeared. And we are extremely enthusiastic. In fact, as I mentioned before, that the vantage of this dramatical situation of the 90s, it was this idea of potentiality of the moment, this enormous space, empty space in front of us, which we could use how we want, realizing whatever we want. And in fact, that was something what for Soviet underground, it was totally, it was not present at all. They really lived in underground. They really lived in the situation of repressions. They were really creating cultural practice in a private life as a form of salvation. And obviously the idea of potentiality was not visiting them never ever. And if you will take into consideration the works of Kabakov created in the time, works of Monastyrsky collective actions, of course it had nothing in common with this radicalism and enthusiasm of the 90s. But nowadays, I guess, we need both experiences. We have to recuperate as 80s, as late 70s, second half of the 70s, and also 80s. It's extremely. We could get a lot from that experience. Well, this is my answer.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So you're sort of arguing that during the Soviet period, there was this oppositional community of artists, and somehow or other an expatriation occurred, and they left when that source of opposition sort of disappeared. And today you have a different situation where there isn't that community artist, whereas before there was that community artist. Is this essentially what you're saying?
Well, no. I want to say that in this precise moment, we have two possibilities. In fact, also as it was also in the late Soviet time, because artists were creating an underground space.
Mhm.
They were doing apartment exhibitions. They were creating fictive museums. They were creating archives. They were doing collective performances outside of the city, in the countryside. I mentioned in this case collective actions group. So they were really trying to live in every, to live art in every day.
Mhm.
But in the same time, all these artists like Kabakov, Bulatov, Monastersky, all the artists who are now in Tate Modern, who are now in MoMA, who are really considered to be extremely important international figures, in the same time, they were also present in official cultural life. I mean, Soviet culture life. All of them, they were member of a union of the artists. It was a trade union of the artists. They were exhibiting works in public official exhibitions, not that works which were addressed to underground community, but different works. Which were also quite curious and interesting. And I think that they were not ashamed on it at all.
So there was an official Soviet art. There was an official Soviet art.
They had double life. They had double identity, or better to say, they had double strategies. And I think it's a smart approach, because still a lot of public spaces exist. Still, you can publicly nowadays do a lot and influence as far as you can, influence situation, artistic situation, public life, social life, and perhaps not all the artists are able to do it. Perhaps not everybody is so elastic, so strategist. But those who can, I guess it would be very productive to be also present in a public life. But in the same time, crucially important, it's to create alternative, new, renovated underground circulation of ideas, of works, of practices, exchanges of opinions, positions. So this underground, well, nowadays it's even much easier because we have internet, we have social media, we have different platforms.
Okay, so I think now Zinaida has a question, so maybe you can just ask it, or.
Yeah,
I was going to ask that too. Thank you.
I've just written my question in the chat. Maybe it's better because the context is a little bit hectic at the moment around.
But excuse me,
I can read it. I'm not.
Yeah, read it, please. Yeah.
So I'm asking my question in chat. How was the Hamburg project received, and how would you evaluate the role of the project for the community of artists? Did it lead to a new community, or was it rather a reflection, an example of the impossibility of a community at that time in the 90s?
Well, thank you very much for this question. It's a good question. It's a good question because in reality, perhaps my presentation of this project was and the involvement of artists in this project were a little bit too pathetic. A passionate discussion, full involvement, 1 year of tense collaboration, but in reality, the community reaction was mostly negative. And I can explain you why. Because in reality, in this precise moment, when this the moment when previous system of art, which, as I mentioned, was very generous, very solid, powerful, collapsed. And when everybody was expecting the new one, the new system based on market, on sponsorship, well, Western model institutions, Western modern system of art. Hamburg project, for the certain moral majority, seemed to be something too how to say, too enigmatic, too closed in itself, too narcissistic, not how to say, not spectacle enough, not aggressive, not because everybody was expecting from the presentation of contemporary art, how to say, an attack on public opinion. Because art community was expecting to be finally noticed by power, noticed by new economical power, by nouveau riche. It wanted to be glamour. It wanted to become part of beautiful public life of the new economical and political, part of the new economical and political elite. From this point of view, and that was absolutely rightful, Hamburg project was total opposite to these expectations. It was about something totally different. Well, I have also only to say that from the certain period of time, in, let's say, in 10 years, when in fact in the next decade, the new institutional system of art was built up, just existed. In fact, that was a revaluation of the Hamburg project experience. In fact, many critics who wrote very aggressive criticism on Hamburg project review their position and in their historical text, just retrospectively appreciated it Hamburg project much more. So it was needed the time to understand the real sense of what we were doing. It's needed time.
Dina was also asking how was the project received in Hamburg. So did it ever went to Hamburg?
But it wasn't received because I sent them letters with apologizing that unfortunately because of few circumstances we can't come. And so.
There is a question from Mary Tracy who asks, what does Viktor think about communism becoming very popular among young people today?
Well, this is well, first of all, which young people? Where? In which country? In Great Britain, in Russia, or where? What can I say you?
And how can you assess that?
Well, in my country, I mean, in Russia, yes, at a certain moment, and that it's happened just at the beginning of this century. Yes, the certain interest in reevaluation of the communist idea, of rethinking of Soviet experience, yes, become very requested, and exactly very requested among young artists. Because when in 2007, in fact, I was doing an exhibition project. By the way, it was epical project. It was done of 4 exhibitions in 4 European museums, and it wasn't a travel show. It was a 4 chapters exhibition realized in different museums, and in fact it was titled Progressive Nostalgia. In fact, in 2007. I was defending an idea that if we want to go ahead, we have to review leftist idea. We have to review our communist past. We have to find a new approach to Soviet experience. And I have to say that time, well, the project was very successful, I have to say, but in reality, it was not very much. It was not widely understood as minimum in Russia, and not only in Russia, in post-Soviet space in general, because progressive nostalgia involved a lot of artists from the former Soviet republics, from Kyrgyzia to Baltic countries. So it was really very large scale exhibition, and yes, in general, it was not very much understood that period of time. But in 5 years, I would say, situation has changed. First of all, thanks for young generation, but that happened in reality in most of the cases, not because of, how to say, of their reflection, not because they wanted to review their own past, not because they wanted to review Russian communists. The fact is that these young neo-communists, in reality, most of them, they've had a scholarship in the West. They realized that among intellectual class in the West, leftist idea, it's very requested, it's very respected, and if you want to be in the certain intellectual debate, you should really consider leftist tradition. You should really be aware of the books of left-wing Western intellectuals. So they came to the country which lived 70 years of communism without any knowledge about Russian history, about Russian leftist intellectual tradition, but with a perfect knowledge about the books and debates among Western left-wing intellectuals. Well, I have to say that my reaction was a bit, how to say, because from one side I was really. I considered it extremely positive, because it really gave. It's really. As minimum, it's really helped to these young people to understand the world in which they are living. That really helped them to be aware of intellectual life in the critical debate, in international critical debate. But from the other side, it seemed me to be a paradoxical neo-colonization of the country with their ideas, positions, theses, which in reality not always were totally adequate to the reality of Putin Russia. And which really not always helped them to understand this reality in an adequate way and to take an adequate position. But this is a process. There's nothing to do. This is a process, and nowadays I think nowadays I think we're just in an absolutely new situation.
Okay, thank you so much. And I think nowadays also, well, what I heard in other conversations, you mentioned that one of the things you're trying to do with the journal was also to kind of activate more the post-colonial debate within the context also of Moscow Art Magazine. And you mentioned that instead, a feminist approach has been something that also the younger generations in Russia specifically has picked up, but the post-colonial debate has somehow skipped that context, also addressed as it is now to the Russian context and to the Russian colonial expansion. So are you still trying, let's say, to address these issues also through the magazine, through the things like you're maybe not always doing exhibitions at the moment, but as I said, you have this triple role of an editor, an art critic, and a curator. So are you still also kind of, this helps you in this current position to sort of address situations from different angles in local context and in an international context?
Well, Andres, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Post-colonial theory, it's extremely up to date for nowadays. Should be, must be, and it is up to date in Russia nowadays, and it's through that the fact that the post-colonial ideas came to Russia very late, yeah, and that only nowadays any thinking subject in Russia, he could avoid it. He has to consider it because it really helps him to understand a lot of things which we are witnessing now. So nowadays it's extremely present in up-to-date debates, and in fact I'm going to publish a special issue on this topic. I mean of my Moscow Art magazine. But at the same time, I have to say that it's not only nowadays, today, that post-colonial theory became known. No, Edward Said, it's translated. Many post-colonial scholars are also translated, and translated, by the way, very well. So the ground, it's prepared. The ground, it's fertile. So the certain work, very methodical work was in the course of the last 15 years was done, definitely was done. The same also with feminist issue, definitely this the basic text of European feminism, it's translated, it's discussed, and but still it's extremely up to date, because it must be done a lot. We are very in this sense, we are very back from the West from this point of view, even from some of the Eastern European countries. But I guess it would be recuperated very soon. From this point of view, I am optimist, because we have a lot of brilliant young scholars who are working with that. So in few years, we'll get beautiful books and special magazines, I'm sure. So from this point of view, I'm an optimist.
There's a question from Tatiana Fyodorova. If we, Nika, have time. I know I'm aware that we're a little bit over time, but maybe we can.
Just short question. Greeting from Moldova. I'm artist and curator from Moldova, and my question is: last 10 years, I am focusing on post-Soviet context, and I have seen that last time it's quite difficult to say Soviet or post-Soviet, and it's quite negative reaction. And many people to say that we need to find another notion, not the Soviet. And what do you think? How we can speak about space without this notion Soviet? Because sometimes people say that it's connected with fascism and many other things. And for me, this question.
Well, it's a good question. It's a good question, but it's not only nowadays because because the idea that that post-Soviet it's not an adequate term was just I've heard this just 15 and 20 years ago, because first of all, for example, in Baltic countries, they were defending the idea that Soviet Union has gone, and we have nothing to do with post-Soviet. We are now correct Western countries. We're part of the European community, part of NATO. We have nothing, and we always hated Soviet power. So we have nothing to do with it. I don't think that this is a right diagnosis. I think Soviet experience, it's many, I mean, it's a long experience. It's well, in Baltic countries, I mean, it was 4 decades. In Russia, it was 7 decades, but still, it's a period. It's a period. And well, nowadays, okay, if for somebody termed Soviet, and post-Soviet, it's traumatic. It's something. I mean, if it's we can change it, but we can't change substance. We can't change that was an extremely important, positively or negatively. We can judge it how we want, but it was extremely important phenomenon of the 20th century. And to say that it's never existed, and that we are not in some way positively or negatively connected with it, I think it would be very naive. It would be very naive and counterproductive.
Yeah, maybe it's kind of. We can speak about this discourse that you speak about also in your book about the trauma, and this is one of the typical approaches that when before you are able to overcome a trauma, you are kind of negating that it ever happened. So this is something that I think you have worked a lot on, and I think you're probably continuing to elaborate this in different ways also today, no? I mean, the word
Absolutely.
trauma, yeah. Right, so I think maybe now, Nika, I think we should roll it up. I think actually, Nika, you should invite, and we should do a second round with Viktor, because I think he has such a wide experience, and he's been part of so many projects and with so interesting ideas and actually terms and that could be very useful also for the context of Museum of Care, that I think we should invite definitely Viktor to come back. I was wondering if there are any other questions, maybe the last question, and then we can close this conversation for today and really invite Viktor back to kind of think about what like some of his concepts and some of his experience can be transformed into tools that could be useful maybe also for the context of the Museum of Care. Are there any other questions?
So yes, first of all, I wanted to say thank you, Viktor, for coming, and definitely would love to continue. For the next session, I would try to connect it to our previous 3 years conversations, and partly connected to David. And here I would suggest to talk about affinity group. Like last book of David was Pirate Enlightenment, where he described these marginal communities who actually formed big part of our mainstream discourse, such as Enlightenment itself. So it would be interesting to talk on using an example of artists, for me at least, would be interesting to talk how the artistic community formed the wider conversation in the society. So just that's would be like my very big interest. But yeah, thank you very much. And also maybe Zinaida, who was part of Museum of Queer for a while and who is doing a lot of interesting work on самодеятельность or do it yourself, could also, and who talk about prolet cult partially with me, would be an interesting partner in our next conversation. So maybe we can share more widely the moderation.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nika. And I'm sure that maybe next time we can extend this and also to deepen this. I think what Viktor would be very interesting to hear about also your other projects. And I think what it seems you are belonging to the generation the same as David Graeber, who shared a specific kind of enthusiasm and then was always like going on with their projects, notwithstanding many difficulties that you faced. And I think that is slowly disappearing. So I'm very curious also to find what is like, do you still keep on with that? And it seems you do. And you're one of the persons who can maybe transmit how this is possible, because also how you as a single person can really inflict a change on within a society, which is or in your own context, in your home context, but also internationally. I was always inspired by that. Thank you. And the same I think applies to David. And as we can see, there are many students and followers of him who sort of through which this passion and enthusiasm lives on. So thank you, Viktor, and I hope
thank you, Andrew, thank you, Nika, thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.